What you need to be able to understand that these terms is discernment, and here's why. So Charles Pincourt, who wrote the Counter Wokecraft book, points out that there's a very powerful rhetorical strategy that you're probably familiar with, that you probably run into, that's referred to as the Motte and Baily strategy, that was named by Nicholas Shackle in 2005 in a paper called On the Vacuity of Postmodernist Methodology. It's a wonderful little paper, very funny. He might have coined the term troll well ahead of his well ahead of its time in that paper as well. And the Motte and Baily classically was a type of castle arrangement where you have kind of a ditch and then a nice field where people would want to live, and then you have a hill and you build a tower on the hill that's highly fortified, and the tower is called the Motte and the field is called the Baily. And so the idea is you want to live in the Baily, but if you need to retreat, should trouble come, you can go hold the Motte for a very long time. So you have a very defensible position that you can retreat to. And when trouble goes away, you can come back out into the Baily and reoccupy the territory that you want. Rhetorically, what that is when you were a little kid and there was what really happened, and then what you said happened when you got in trouble. Those are the what really happened is the Baily, and the thing you tell people when you got in trouble is the Motte. And so that's what it boils down to. And this is where you will see these words used very strategically in two ways. One is defensive and one is offensive. If you don't have the discernment to be able to see this happening, you can't call it out when it's occurring and stop it. You can't set up your board, if you take over a school board or whatever, can't fight back if it doesn't know this is happening. So the defensive use is one everybody's familiar with. And when I said, that they frame critical race theory as just teaching honest history, or you don't want kids to learn about racism, they're giving a very defensible, extreme oversimplification of what they're actually doing, when in fact they have this lifelong commitment to an ongoing process of you having to be a social activist on their behalf always in all ways, and must believe the Marxist doctrine behind it. That's a big difference between just wanting to teach honest history or whatever. These are the kinds of things that they facilitate between these two different views. If you can't discern this, the way that you fight this is what I call stealing the Motte and bombing the Baily. You occupy their defended position first, or better than they can. Like, let's actually talk, and that's what we heard. Let's actually talk about what teaching of history in this country is going to look like, and then you lay it down. And then, but here's what you call honest history, and then you start railing on the 1619 Project or something. That's bombing the Baily. That's bombing the Baily. So you have to be able to do both of those to stop that kind of a Motte and Baily incursion. You have to be able to call out the dynamic and point out both sides of it. It's much scarier and much more common, though, to run into the Motte and Baily as often as you hear that in an offensive strategy, which works like a Trojan horse. The way the offensive version of the Motte and Baily would operate is that you take one of these loaded terms like diversity and you decide that you're going to write it into a piece of institutional policy. Now, all of a sudden, you had a weird incident. You have a weird incident. Now, all of a sudden, there's much concern and we have to take action. We're going to have to write a policy. Well, I think we should make sure that we put, just to appeal to what's going on and to the mood of the room, I think we should just add on to the words and a constant commitment to reaffirm diversity into the statement. And everybody doesn't say a word because they know what diversity means. And the second that thing becomes policy, or the second they end up with a majority on the board and they have the power to enforce it, that definition flips over to the activist definition, and you're now stuck with a policy that has a very radical, very specific, very political project built into it that you can't get away from because you approved it under a different meaning of the word, not realizing, because who in their right mind is going to say, what do you mean by that, to an everyday word like race or diversity or inclusion? And so what you have to be able to do to take on critical race theory in the same way that has been so successful, like, for example, in Virginia, is you have to be able to, A, become aware that these manipulations are occurring, and B, you have to be able to step in, identify those, that's the discernment part, identify those manipulations, and then to be able to call out the dynamic and all of what's going on. That's not for everybody, but there are people who can do it, and they can do it quite well, and they can pull off the mask of the lie. You may be able to study to become one of those people if you wish. I'm not saying that anybody lacks the talent, but not everybody wants to do this. I will promise you, as somebody who does it for a living, it's tedious. It's not particularly pleasant. to pick at equivocation all the time. That said, you also can be somebody who supports people who wants to do that if you don't particularly want to, because it's absolutely necessary.